The room was dim, lit only by the fading light slanting through the high windows. Dust motes hung in the air like tiny spirits, moving in the faint breeze from the cracked door. She sat on the edge of the wooden table, knees drawn to her chest, fingers twisting the hem of her worn dress. "Don't read it out loud," she whispered, voice trembling, eyes wide with a mix of fear and urgency. Her hands shook so badly that the paper she clutched looked like it might crumble in her grip. The room felt smaller with each passing second, the shadows leaning closer as though they were listening, waiting. He stepped into the light, boots thudding softly on the rough floorboards. A slow, deliberate sound, heavy with authority, with the weight of a man used to commanding silence. The rancher, Thomas, was a broad man, shoulders squared and hands calloused from decades of work under a relentless sun. His eyes, dark and watchful, scanned her face as he crouched down to meet her gaze. "I need to know what it says," he said, voice low, gravelly, almost a growl, but there was no cruelty in it. Only a patient insistence that weighed like a physical thing. She shook her head violently, clutching the paper tighter. "You don't understand. If you speak these words, it'll ruin everything. Please don't." Her eyes darted to the door as though expecting the walls themselves to come alive and punish them for daring to hold secrets. She wasn't just scared of him, Thomas realized. She was terrified of the thing the words might unleash. Thomas's fingers hovered over the parchment, brushing the edges without touching it. "I've spent my life fixing what I can. If this is something that needs fixing, I need to hear it. Just once." His voice was calm now, steady, and somehow stronger than the trembling fear that radiated from her. He wasn't asking. He was stating, gently, firmly, like the land itself could not argue with him. Her breath hitched, a shallow, rapid gasp. "You don't know what you're asking. People have died over this people I loved." She swallowed hard, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And if you speak it, you'll make them come back for you too." Thomas leaned back slightly, folding his arms across his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just looked at her, the quiet weight of his presence filling the space between them. "Then let me face it," he said simply. "I've faced storms. I've faced fire and flood, rustlers and thieves. If this is worse, I'll face it too." A long silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The sun dipped lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the choice to be made. Finally, with a slow, trembling motion, she handed the paper over. Thomas caught it with one hand, careful not to crumple it. His thumb traced the faint, shaky handwriting. "God help me," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Then, in a voice louder than anyone had spoken in that room for years, he read the first line. The sound of the words hit like a cold wind, sharp and cutting. Her eyes squeezed shut, hands pressed over her face as though she could block the air itself from carrying the syllables. And then silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes naturally. It was heavy, thick, the kind that sits on your chest and makes you question whether you should even breathe. Thomas lowered the paper slowly, eyes scanning the room as though expecting the walls to respond. "It's worse than I imagined," he said finally, voice low but steady. "Worse than I feared." She peeked through her fingers, the fear still evident, but now mingled with something else. Relief, maybe, or perhaps the first flicker of trust. "You read it," she said softly, and nothing happened. Thomas didn't answer right away. He didn't smile. He just stood, pacing slowly, boots creaking against the floorboards. "Nothing happens by itself," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. It doesn't mean it won't change everything." His gaze met hers, sharp and steady. "But at least now we know." Her fingers loosened from the edges of her dress, and she let out a shaky breath. You think we can fix it?" Her voice was fragile, tentative, like a bird testing the wind for the first time after a storm. Thomas shook his head slightly. "Fix it? Maybe. Survive it? That's more like it. But we'll try. Together." He moved closer, standing over her. Not towering, not threatening, just present. He handed her a glass of water, and she took it with both hands, trembling. Every sip seemed to bring her back a little more into the room, back from the brink of whatever memory or fear had haunted her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters, carrying the scent of dust and sun-baked earth. Thomas glanced toward the window, feeling the land itself shift with the promise of evening. He had faced storms like this before, not just from nature, but from men, from mistakes, from secrets that festered in silence. This was different. This was human, and human danger had a weight that dirt and wind could never teach you. She finally spoke, voice steadier now. Why would you risk it? Why would you read it, when I begged you not to? Thomas sighed, lowering himself onto the chair opposite her. He leaned back, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. Because some things left unread fester like poison. You can't heal what you hide. You can't protect what you ignore. And I don't walk away from people in need. Not anymore. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but they were different now. They weren't just fear. They were gratitude, fragile but real. She looked down at the paper, then back at him. Then what happens now? Thomas's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sun was finally disappearing behind the distant hills, leaving streaks of red and gold against the sky. Now we act, he said. Slowly, carefully, but we act. Because secrets, they don't protect you. They only wait until someone brave enough, or foolish enough, speaks them aloud. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the rafters seemed amplified. Thomas worked the ranch as always, boots kicking up dust, hands steady, eyes scanning for any hint of trouble. And she stayed close, learning the rhythms of the land, learning the rhythms of trust. Every night, she clutched the paper and read silently, committing to memory, but never again aloud. Thomas had taught her the lesson of the spoken word. Once it leaves your lips, it carries power that no one can take back. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the horizon, the sound of horses came faintly across the dry plains. Thomas didn't flinch. His hand rested lightly on the old rifle by the door, not in threat, but in readiness. The horses approached slow, deliberate. Two riders, shadows against the dying light, and Thomas could see the outline of a third behind them, hunched and wary. They came, she whispered, voice barely audible. She stayed close behind him, yet not trembling. The lessons of the past days had tempered her fear. What do we do? Thomas didn't answer immediately. He watched, boots planted firmly, eyes calculating. The riders were not just strangers, they were seekers drawn by curiosity, by greed, by the invisible lure of the word she carried. We wait, he said finally. We see what they want first, and then we decide what they get. The lead rider dismounted, boots kicking up the dirt. He approached slow, hands visible, gloves worn from travel. I hear there's something dangerous in that room, he said, voice polite, but Thomas could hear the undercurrent of challenge. Something that doesn't belong to you. We're here to retrieve it. Thomas's eyes didn't waver. That's a mighty fine word you used, retrieve, he said. But that room doesn't belong to secrets. It belongs to people who survive. And if you want it, you're going to have to earn it. A tense silence fell, the kind that makes the air itself seem heavier. The riders exchanged glances, then nodded to each other. But Thomas didn't move. His hand was firm on the rifle, eyes sharp, waiting for the first mistake. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the window panes like a whisper. She stood behind him, heart hammering, but steady in resolve. Minutes passed like hours. Then, slowly, the riders backed away, muttering under their breath. They hadn't expected the calm, the stillness, the unwavering presence of a man who had already faced storms darker than their ambition. And in that quiet retreat, a lesson settled into the room. Some words are dangerous, but some people are more dangerous still when they stand for what's right. Later, as twilight deepened into night, Thomas and she sat on the porch. The paper rested on the table between them, safe for now, unread aloud. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dust, the distant howl of a coyote, the whispers of a world that always moved, always waited, and sometimes, just sometimes, allowed justice in the smallest measure. You could have been reckless, she said softly. You could have spoken it anyway. Thomas shook his head, looking at her. Some truths, they're meant to be known, but some, they're meant to be guarded. And what matters is not just knowing, but surviving knowing. Protecting what you must and letting go of what you can't change. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning like the first soft light over the hills. Then we guard it. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried relief, pride, and a quiet warning all at once. We guard it, and maybe, one day, when the world is ready, it can be spoken. But not yet. Not now. She looked out over the ranch, the land bathed in moonlight. The shadows didn't frighten her anymore. They moved around her like companions, reminders that fear was temporary, but courage, patience, and wisdom could endure. Thomas watched her, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. They had survived the first test. The words were safe, their power tempered by choice. And that, in itself, was enough for tonight. As the fireflies began their slow dance across the porch, Thomas spoke again, voice low, carrying both a challenge and a reflection. We all have secrets. Some are ours to keep, some are ours to share. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is decide when to speak, when to hold, and when to protect. Are you brave enough for that? She looked at him, eyes steady now, not wide with fear, but alive with comprehension. She nodded, slowly, and whispered, I think I am. Thomas leaned back in the chair, letting the night settle around them. The ranch was quiet. The horses were resting. The wind whispered through the trees. And somewhere in the distance, the world kept turning, oblivious to the fragile victories held within this small room, on this small patch of earth, under the vast sky. If you followed this far, then think about this. How often do we let secrets control our lives? How often do we speak words that shouldn't be spoken, or stay silent when action is required? Could you have the courage to protect what's dangerous but precious? Could you stand still, even when the world is pushing you to act rashly? If this story stirred something inside you, something raw or fragile, don't leave it quiet. Hit that like button, tap subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones who choose to guard what matters, who change everything.